Now, before we started our show, we were talking about also Houdini, which was the inspiration for James Randi. And Leo, you were telling us about the fact that there was a seance run with a lady who brought Houdini back. Can you tell us that again? Because that was very interesting.
Yes. The lady's called Lynn de Gibb Swarte, and very well-known medium, fantastic medium, great evidence. And she was invited to go along to the Magic Circle, some members there, and this was filmed in Italy. And she got a communicator stepping forward that gave the name. She told them, "I'm not giving your name." Not having anything to do with that. So he basically started to give information about himself. Now, Lynn didn't know at the time, but there was Harry Houdini's uncle and his brother. There was also another gentleman there that knew Harry Houdini personally really, really well. And that guy had set the thing up. And he was going to give them all a special present, and he commissioned these magician's mirrors, which she showed me how it works. And you turn it, and an image appears, and then you turn it back, and it disappears. It's not a flat mirror; it's a kind of triangle sort of thing. And there was an Italian film crew there. Now, the gentleman in question that was coming through was Harry Houdini. And he started to give information that only his uncle and brother and this other gentleman knew, especially his brother. Fantastic seance, lots and lots of evidence. And that film has never surfaced. Now, I feel that somewhere along the line, the skeptics got hold of it, and that has to be buried. Again, not scientific. You know, as I said when we were talking before, if somebody has got to change the facts or skew the facts, lie about an outcome, then you know very well that's a conscious thing, and you're giving the opposite of what's happened. So you're telling lies. Now, if you're doing that deliberately, that you must consciously know that what you're finding is real. To skew it, you know. So that's one of my bugbears about mediums. But interesting.
When did this seance take place? Because obviously the brother and the uncle were there. I'm trying to think what ages they must have been. Because Harry Houdini died.
The brother was quite elderly. I don't know. Lynn did tell me this. I know her personally. It was a number of years ago. I'm not entirely sure. I think it would have been 30 years, or perhaps more.
Right. So
ago.
we're talking about the 1980s, somewhere in the 1980s.
We could be. I'm not entirely sure, but I can find out from Lynn.
And how do you spell her name for anybody that wants to check?
It's Lyn.
Yeah.
DE.
Yeah.
Lynn. Oh no, which way around is it? It's Lynn. Lyn Gibb Gibb DDE Swarte Swarte.
Right.
And she actually created her own spiritualist movement. I think it's a Christian spiritualist organisation, and she's a most reverend person. But she took part in that.
Wow.
What do you think about? So what do you think about the concept that, putting on my tinfoil hat here, that magic, actually, the term magic originally started off not as illusions, but people genuinely, believing.
Ritual magicians,
believing they were creating kind of like reality or manipulating reality, not kind of like cards and rabbits out of hats and kind of thing.
Yeah.
Would we, I don't know how you guys feel, but I kind of feel that in the kind of like the dark suit Illuminati upper cabal levels, I think they believe in magic, and they believe absolutely that all of this kind of like psychic mediumship spirituality is real, but because they want to control mankind, they've got to convince people that it's not real. And do you think that the skeptics are being funded and the money is being pushed towards the skeptics to kind of like poo-poo it and keep a lid on it, essentially? Do you think that's what's going on?
I would. Sorry.
You go.
I would say that's 100% right. I've always maintained that the earliest religion was Wicca, witchcraft, because as we've grown more towards modern man, and you've got the Industrial Revolution and that, what's happened generally to the population is we've begun to close down. There's a reversal of that now since 2012. But our instinct, our gut feeling, whatever we want to call it, has got numbed an awful lot. Now, if you go back to the very early ages of man, they understood that there were energies about. They understood that if you could manipulate energies, then good things would happen. So you could do what they would call spells for crops and this kind of thing. So they understood that it worked. So I think it's very powerful, and it's something that we have instinctively. It was there to protect us. Yeah. From things we couldn't see in the dark, animals, there may be a trap, we're going to get eaten. There was a gut feeling that was protecting us. And so that has always linked us. I saw many years ago a gentleman, Aleister Crowley, was being interviewed, the King of Witches. And I think he died, I'm not sure, in 1935, 1940, something like that. And this was an old black and white film. It was an interview with him, and I think it was about half hour long or an hour long, something like that. And the interview was slightly skeptic, and he said to Aleister Crowley, and this was live, being filmed at that time, and he said to him, "Can you give me some proof of your power?" And they were walking down the road. And there was a guy that was in front of them as they were walking. And what Aleister Crowley did was start to mimic the guy's walk. And he followed him for a couple of minutes. And Aleister Crowley dropped to his knee and the guy went flat on his face. And the interviewer just didn't know what to do. So there are energies there that can be manipulated. And I think you're right. Again, it goes back to the government and that kind of conspiracy, because, if they don't believe in it, why are they spending now probably 100 million a year on this? They do say the next war is going to be fought with remote viewing. And if we're looking at that, China's got a quarter of the world's population. They are very into this. The Russians, sorry, Ben.
No, it's okay. I think what you said is very interesting. Now, it's absolutely true. Aleister Crowley, interestingly, he also went along with this idea that he wanted to produce a difference between real supernatural power and stage illusionism. So he invented a new word to describe what he did: magic, with a K at the end. It's ended in CK rather than just C, which is how it's normally spelt. But yeah, this is, ever since prehistoric times, we have had a spiritual awareness, and there's been shamans, and there's been, you mentioned Wicca. Wicca are basically where you get the word witch. It just means wise woman. It's an old English word. But yeah, in prehistoric times, in pre-Illuminati times, we had this awareness of personal spiritual reality. One of the hallmarks of the rise of the Illuminati, and in fact Illuminati-controlled society, is, Andrew, you touched on this as well. Essentially, we have this bifurcation, which has kind of scuppered the whole connection that we have to spirit. On the one hand, we have atheo-skeptico-materialism, which in our country is the prevailing view, which is everything is mechanism, everything is physical. There is nothing other than that, which is the typical atheo-skeptic view. The Richard Dawkins, French, Randi, etc. On the other hand, we have the organized religions, which were created in Roman times mostly by the Illuminati bloodlines. We have, for example, Christianity in its present form. Whatever Jesus said has been perverted by the church, edited by Saint Jerome. The first Bible was translated 3 times and edited. Things like that. And there's evidence to suggest that the Vatican was behind the Holy Quran as well. Judaism has been warped and changed over the years. We know from Ethiopian Judaism that it was, which is much older than normal Orthodox or Reform Judaism, that it's changed enormously and probably been engineered to be different. So yeah, we have these two bifurcations. Both of those have one thing in common. They separate our connection from spirit. David Icke has made this point very well indeed. He calls them opposames. Yeah. So on the one hand, we have there is nothing. On the other hand, there is something, but we got this institution and a guy who reads a book and preaches to you, who's the gateway to this God. Let's put this God up on a cloud, So yeah, that's definitely the case. But of course, so therefore you would expect some kind of suppression. In the same way that UFOs are suppressed for various reasons, you can imagine that things such as the afterlife is suppressed. This could be why when the witchcraft trial took place in 1944, the defendant, Helen Duncan, who was a physical medium, actually a manifestation medium, a very elite, probably the most powerful medium who ever existed we know of, she was not allowed to perform in court, even though if she had performed in court, it would have exonerated her by every standard of the law. And several people have said this is because they were so desperate to put her in jail before D-Day in case she gave away the secrets of D-Day through the spirits. But it could also have been because it would create something of a rather strange common law precedent, wouldn't it? It would. You see, basically there would be no modern skeptic movement if that had happened, because we could just say the Crown versus Duncan. Every time a skeptic came up, we say Crown versus Duncan, because everyone would want their grandmother, their dead great grandmother, come through in court and defend them. It's like, so this is why they think they fixed it so that Helen Duncan couldn't perform in court. And there's many other examples of this. And of course, just like with the UFO technology, that Andrew Johnson, who used to go to Highwick and Paranormal, he talks about this an awful lot. Just because in the same way, psychic powers in the afterlife is also suppressed for psychological reasons, cultural reasons. They don't want us to know because it's about Illuminati control, and also because they have weaponized it, just like they've weaponized directed energy technology to destroy the World Trade Center, some of which they got from UFOs, I believe. But that is from the aliens. And Lee, I think you're probably referring, I think, possibly to the work of John Ronson and The Men Who Stare at Goats. That fascinating book. It was made into a comedy film, but it's actually a very serious subject. And indeed, Ronson made a documentary series based on that book called The Crazy Rulers of the World, which I do recommend. The thing about it is he doesn't go deep enough. He just scratches the surface. But basically, these powers have been weaponized, and it's not just happened now. And McGonigal and these other people, Ed Dames and these other people that Ronson talks about, that's just the start of it. I mean, this goes back a long way. I mean, in World War II, Helen Duncan had an opposite number in Germany called Sylvia Ortiz, and then the Nazis were quite open about using psychics and mediums for intelligence gathering. And indeed, all through the Cold War, both sides used these things. Uri Geller, the guy who hated Randi so much, and interestingly, just as an aside, Randi's final wish was that he be cremated and his ashes be thrown in Uri Geller's face. I'm waiting to see if that actually happens.
I would love that.
But Geller, the whole thing with Randi and Geller is just a bit of a sideshow, because Geller's stage magic, it's obvious that he only has about 6 tricks. I mean, he's a pretty mediocre magician, but that's just a front. He was recruited in 1973 to the Stanford Research Institute Psychic Warfare Program, along with someone called Ingo Swann, who wrote a fascinating book, Penetration, absolutely brilliant book, where he, Geller, and several other people were basically doing remote viewing for the CIA. And Geller also worked for Mossad as well, because he is Israeli. And he worked for Mossad as well during the 6-Day War, spying on the Egyptians and things like that. I mean, it's something that apparently is nonsense according to the skeptics, but it's been used continuously, and as you said, Lee, a lot of money's been spent on these programs. They must be delivering results, and they have. It goes back a long way. I mean, Joan of Arc, Jeanne Roumet. She's a 14-year-old girl from this little village called Arc. It's Jeanne Roumet, her name was. The king put her in charge of the French army because she's getting divine inspiration, and it's true. I mean, they whopped the English at the Siege of Orleans.
So she is the first remote viewer,
she was a remote viewer psychic warrior. I mean, she was giving divine instructions to the army, so the generals just put her in charge. Sadly, the English caught her and burnt her at the stake. But it's an example of what we're talking about here. And it goes, Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great used to consult soothsayers before going into battle.
They all did. They all had those advisors.
I'd be very surprised.
Am I right in saying Winston Churchill actually had kind of astrologers as well?
Yeah, he was in the Druid order, and yeah.
I'll tell you something about Sir Winston Churchill. Now, I had never told anyone except the group that I was teaching. I work in a very particular way. In a sense, I'm quite open. So if there's a teacher from Spirit that comes through that specialises in colour healing, I would allow them to come in. And if someone wanted to talk on a specific thing, then they would come in. I went into trance one night, and usually if you're in trance, certainly deep trance, you don't know what's going on. But for some reason, I was quite aware, so I was beside myself, but I was hearing the voice, and I recognised the voice. Now, if you hear my shows or when I speak, there's always a connection with spirit. People say, well, Elvis Presley's just told me this. Can't happen, cannot happen. There has to be a connection. Anyway, my very good friend who was there, he was a policeman for decades. He came to see me afterwards, and he said, do you know who that was? And I said, I've got an idea, but I don't want to say. He said, that was Winston Churchill, which I knew. Now, I've only found out recently because I'm doing a book on Leslie Flint, and this may interest you, hopefully. It's a book of transcriptions, but it's got recordings with it. And I took a sample recording to a highly reputable forensic audio testing company in the States, and they said that the voice that come through, it was Winston Churchill's wartime speech, so obviously Winston Churchill, but the comparison they didn't know anything about, and they said that there is a confidence of over 99% that it's the same voice. Now, they thought that there might have been 5 or 6 years difference between the two. There was 47 years difference, and the recording was made through Flint 22 years after Churchill died. So how that came about was my cousin was helping me illustrate the book, and she said to me, have you heard of a gentleman called Malcolm Green? I said, no. She said, he's a medium. He's written a book, and in it, Malcolm Green was a lifelong friend of Winston Churchill for over 30 years. And Winston Churchill had lots of mediumistic experiences. One of those was when he was captured in the Boer War, he was asking Spirit, what do I do? And he wanted to escape. They gave him the go-ahead. They led him for miles to this house, and he knocked on the door, introduced himself, and was met by the reply of, thank God you've come here, because there's not a friendly house within 27 miles. So Malcolm Green was a very, very good friend of our family. So immediately I understood when Churchill came through before, is because there's a direct link with my family. So Winston Churchill had lots of experiences himself with spirit. There were some in the cabinet, and others like Lord Dowding who had these experiences. So Winston Churchill knew of that, but he was in a position when met with what was being given by Helen Duncan. Do I expose myself? Because Dowding was getting hammered for his views. He was the guy that actually won us the war. They removed him and put some clown in charge. But, you know, the Battle of Britain, it was all over. That was it. But there were lots of people in the cabinet that wouldn't accept what he did. So he had to go along with the theory, let's arrest this woman and get her out of the way. But he'd actually sat with Helen Duncan as well.
That's interesting. And I think he's also got a connection with Aleister Crowley. I think he asked Aleister Crowley to send bad vibes to the Nazis to stop them invading. I've heard that one.
Yeah, there was a bit of that going backwards and forwards. Sorry, Ben, go on.
Okay.
Yeah, there was witches. There was a load of witches, I think.
Oh, was it? Yeah.
Yeah,
that's absolutely
in
fascinating
Sussex,
stuff.
and I think it was the pioneer of witchcraft in the modern age. There was Gardnerian witchcraft, and I forget the other one. But it was one of those guys that led all these witches to do spells against the Germans invading Britain or something.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I didn't know all that. That's fascinating to me. Because,
I could be wrong, but I could have sworn that Crowley was part of it. But
he might have been, but he was regarded at the time, I believe, as like Britain's most dangerous man. So I don't think they were likely to have said, "Oh, do you fancy helping us out with him?"
The thing like Crowley was a bit irresponsible. I mean, it's almost certain that at some point he was recruited to the intelligence services simply because he travelled so much. He went around the world a number of times, and in those days, very few people travelled very far. He was also at Trinity College, which is famous for its spies on both sides of the war and Cold War.
There's a story about Aleister Crowley written by his son. I forget his son's name now, and my ex-wife read it at the time, and she pointed this passage out to me, and she said, "Read this." So I read it, and accordingly, what it was, Aleister Crowley's son recounted a tale when he was younger. He was walking with his dad, Aleister Crowley, and they were going along like a pathway on a very steep cliff edge or something, very narrow path, by the cliffs or something. And as they walked along, they came along two nuns who were walking down the same path towards them, and they were going to come up and thinking, "Oh God, this pathway is only big enough for like single file people. What are we going to do?" So he said, and this is how his son described it. He said his father said, "Good afternoon, ladies," tipped his hat, and he said he stepped to the left off the path into midair, took his son with him, they levitated, and the nuns ran past them in absolute shock horror, and he stepped back onto the path again. That was the story. I'm not saying it's true, but that's the story related to the book.
There's lots of independent witnesses to the sort of things Crowley got up to. And it's interesting that you see, Churchill was not in the loop when it comes to the prosecution of Helen Duncan. In fact, he even wrote to the Home Secretary at one point and said, "Look, what's going on? Why are the courts being tied up with this?" He called it obsolete tomfoolery. In the middle of a war, for goodness sake. And so he was kept out of the loop. But there was a conspiracy which I believe involved espionage and psychic espionage, because the people involved, Roy Firebrace, he was a brigadier, head of the intelligence. There was Ian Fleming, head of naval intelligence at the time, who'd spied on the Moscow show trials in the Spanish Civil War. He was also the author of the James Bond novels, which led to the very successful film franchise, which you know. And these people were members of the SPR, Society for Psychical Research. They were aware of the implications of what Helen Duncan was doing. They knew that in November of 1943 there'd been a terrible disaster off the coast of Somerset. Some people were there was one of those big landing boats, these infantry landing boats with a ramp at the front. You see them in the movies. One of those sank, loaded up with troops, 3 pilots and about 40 troops. They all drowned. And these guys knew about D-Day. They knew that D-Day was coming. They knew when. They knew where. It was June the following year, and they're all in the spirit world, floating around, waiting to come through in one of Helen Duncan's seances, where by that time we know MI5 were watching them. Firebrace specifically recommended that she be watched by the Human Intelligence Division, which was led by Sarah Cyril Maud, who was actually KC. He was actually her prosecutor as well, interestingly. And
there's a bit of conspiracy around that as well, yeah.
But you can bet, like, if our side were watching her, you can be damn sure the enemy was as well. Because they knew that the Nazis knew better than anyone else exactly what was going on here, because they had a very open mind when it came to this sort of thing. Sylvia Ortiz, they were using her. So really, the entire war effort depended on stopping Helen Duncan practicing.
Yeah,
wow. And they don't care if they can lock some innocent woman can go to jail for that. They don't care.
Well, yeah, there's millions of lives at stake if you're trying to save the country, or indeed trying to overwhelm the country. I did hear as well that both Germany and the UK, they were quoting some of the quatrains from Nostradamus as well. So they were both using that as propaganda, to say that they were going to win. Yeah.
It's interesting because I made the point, just a thing that occurred to me whilst I'm writing about Helen Duncan in my forthcoming book, the fact that she was invited, or she requested to do a seance, a full materialization seance in the court, which was denied by them. And yet I was thinking, well, why did they deny it? Because the thing is, if you could prove life after death and have spirit guides or whoever coming through, they could then talk to the judge and say, this is how you stop the war, or, they would surely want to tap into her powers and use it to their advantage rather than just closet her away, because it could have, stopped further lives being lost, and it would forever herald maybe thousands of years peace for mankind if they only followed maybe some sort of spiritual guidance from the spirit world. But alas, they just were interested in getting the war done, whatever they wanted to do.
Well, that's... sorry, Lee, because I've got a perfect answer, because I know that I've helped you. We talked about your book.
We did,
on this subject, yeah. It's interesting that the judge refused at first, and then Loseby, the defence counsel, petitioned the judge. He appealed, and the judge said, we'll poll the jury. They polled the jury, and the jury elected not to, which is just unbelievable. I mean, it's just, even for your own curiosity, why would you?
Yeah.
But if it had happened, of course, the thing about it is, it's for the various reasons that we talked about, you can't have something like that done in a courtroom, and just because of the implications in terms of publicizing the ability of this sort of thing to happen. But at the same time, rather than let it out in a public courtroom, in front of the jury, in front of the media, in front of everyone in the public gallery, so everyone now knows there's an afterlife, and it's absolutely proven because we've got it in court. It's in the courtroom records. Rather than do that, what they did was they of course used this in secret, as we've been discussing. They did exactly what they do with the UFO technology. They use it in secret, and they don't let ordinary people have it. But the question is, why didn't they just offer Helen a job? I mean, she was a patriotic woman. Why didn't they just offer for her to become the British or teach? Maybe she wasn't suitable in some ways. I mean, she was, from what I gather from talking to people, Maggie, her granddaughter, and several other people, she's quite impulsive. She was an impulsive person. She wasn't necessarily easy to get on with. She could sometimes lose her temper and things like that. It may have something to do with that. And there may be other reasons for it. But I mean, I personally don't see why, rather than lock her in jail, rather than putting her in jail, which of course is a terrible travesty of justice, why don't they just pay her off? Just say, look, sign the official secret acts, just don't practice for a few months. Here's enough money to compensate you. It would be cheaper than the trial. I think they were just very worried that she would maybe she would breach the agreement, because she broke a non-disclosure, she broke an exclusivity contract in 1930. Because she signed up for the London Spiritualist Alliance, which is today called the College of Psychic Studies. I've been to their location. But at the same time, she was moonlighting with Harry Price, this other independent psychical researcher. Absolute hell broke loose as a result of that.
The Price was right.
He was wrong. He lied, actually, Price.
But Leo, you got a connection with Helen Duncan's granddaughter as well, haven't you?
Yeah, Maggie Hahn. Yeah, I know her really well. She came to stay with me a few years ago for a few weeks, and she's got a lot to say about her grandmother, and there's lots of little inside bits as well that come to light. I think she wants to get a book together, and there was talk of a film, and Judi Dench was going to play Helen Duncan, and Bob Hoskins was going to play Barbanel, and so there was a whole book, a whole film that was going to go forward, and who runs that huge animation film company?
Disney?
No, there's the other one with that Spielberg. Was going to direct it. Yeah, and it fell apart at the very last moment, which is a shame. And of course, Bob Hoskins has passed himself now.
Yeah,
but there's a lot of fascinating stuff, that's going on. And I think one of the fundamental things, Ben, that you changed on was that if it had come, it would have changed life completely. Now, one of the reasons, and we've all touched on it in one way or another, is that people will understand that in some senses the government will lose control of it, and people will have their own free will, and they'll realise that there are other things, and we would reject government in that kind of sense. Perhaps not a bad thing at all. But it's the government's loss of control in people being free thinking and understanding that there are other things, and so that's the basic reason that it's hidden. It's like UFOs, the government's view is we can't be trusted, and they've given us this ball of that there are aliens that are wanting to take over. They're going to invade, and if people knew, the world would panic. And that some of these alien races are millions of years ahead of us. We're not even like ants. If they wanted to attack, we can't do anything. But there's various stories propounded about that, and again, it's all about control, and governments don't want to lose control. And if they realise that there was, if people generally realise that there is an afterlife, then it gives them a different kind of freedom. Why, bow down to governments?
On that note, I wonder what James Randi thinks in the spirit world now.
This is where I was coming to. As we're now drawing the show to a close, final thoughts on James Randi. He's now died, passed over. He's woken up in the spirit world, I presume, or unless he's in a lower region. And Ben, I mean, we'll go from Ben to Leo. What do you think he's thinking?
Well, it's possible. I mean, from what I gather, there are when people pass over, they don't necessarily even realise what's happened. I mean, there is some people report through psychic connections that firstly, there's something called the lower astral, which is like hell, but unlike the hell of the Bible, it's some way it's a place you're not necessarily confined forever. You can actually escape from the lower astral. Some spirits actually do emerge from the lower astral, but what some spirits experience is a denial that they're dead. And now this could take the form of the ghost phenomenon, rather like the Sam Wheat character in the film Ghost, which is a really good movie, actually. It's a really good film where he essentially is walking the earth as a kind of invisible, sort of a non-physical entity. He's just walking around like he normally does. No one can see him. And he has to try and communicate with his ex-partner and things like that. Very good film. Do watch Ghost if you get the chance. There's also, some people experience a life simulation. Now, there's another very good film I recommend called Jacob's Ladder, which is about a man who dies, and he actually doesn't realize he's dead. He appears to be, in terms of what he experiences, he's just going through, his life continues. He believes his life is continuing. He's experiencing a life simulation, which eventually breaks down. He realizes that through a number of experiences he has, that he actually has died. And then when he comes to that awareness, he can move forward. He can move forward away from this simulation into the reality of the spirit world. But it's an absolutely fascinating, it's a scary film. It's a horror movie, but it's very, very good. It's a very good film. And it's possible James Randi is experiencing that right now, unless he was part of the cover-up. And this is something I take seriously, that he actually he knows very well that there is an afterlife, but part of his work as a skeptic was to be part of this way of keeping it from the people. He may have believed he was doing the right thing. He may have said, look, we have to tell people this because otherwise society will break down, and I'm willing to be part of this suppression operation so that society can be maintained. People, it's horrible. People are going to lose children and things like that, and they're going to be very sad. When they pass over, they'll learn the truth. I'm just trying to prevent cultural breakdown of humanity. And it's possible he was one of these people, because I know there are people like that. There are people, I think, in the skeptic movement like that, who are knowing agents of the government. So it depends on whether he was one of those or not, whether he truly believed there was just no afterlife, in which case, who knows? I mean, what would be great, and would be really exclusive, actually, if he could actually come through right now.
Well,
if he was wrong. Anyone got any messages from him?
Yeah. Leo, do you think he might return?
I think it's very unlikely. It would be nice to think in some way that that he did know the truth, but had this idealistic image of, people need protecting. Personally, I do think that he was a hardline skeptic. That being the case, what is very, very likely is that he is in complete denial. And as we know, there is no time in spirit, certainly nothing that we would understand as time. So what for him may feel like a few weeks could be hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years. So I do believe that he's in absolute denial.
Unless, of course, he's met by Houdini and who says, look, this is how it's going, mate,
Absolutely. I'll give you a very quick... I had an interesting exchange of emails with a skeptic, and he'd had a near-death experience. And he was absolutely convinced. He said, I have died, I have been there, there is nothingness, it's black. That's it. So my reply to him, never got a reply back, was, you seem to have missed the point that you were aware of blackness and nothingness.
Yeah.
No answer. So,
Yeah.
But I think it's highly likely that he's in complete denial. It's been just a few weeks in Earth terms. I think it would be difficult. I think if he did come back, personally, I think if some medium was crazy enough to say, hey, do you know, I've got Randy here, I think that would be the end of their career for sure. But why would he? Well, why would he destroy a life's work by coming back and saying, hey, I've no pun intended, I've seen the light? Not going to happen.
Well, I don't think many mediums will actually publicly say, I feel Randy, because it's going to... Their bookings will go down.
I'm sure Joe Biden's got no problem saying it.
Yeah. So anyway, on that note, ladies and gentlemen...
I was just going to say, Neil, I was just going to say that if James Randi does come through, who's going to believe it, really?
But this is it. All the
because who's he going to come through to? It's going to come through.
Yeah,
it's going to come through to skeptics.
Yeah.
Although, interestingly, could it possibly be that if James Randi realizes that there is a spirit world and he completely does a U-turn and becomes absolutely passionate in kind of like correcting the errors of what he was trying to preach when he was here, could he come through with even stronger evidence to try and convince his skeptic friends?
That's possible, because there was a book I read many years ago by an author, Anthony Borgia, who channeled spirit wrote this book by this guy, Monsignor Hugh Benson, who had psychic experience in his lifetime, but when he died, he was actually a Monsignor for the church. So his professional job was basically to say, oh, that's dangerous, blah 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 blah. So he said that when he came back through the channeled writings of this medium, part of his life's mission now on the other side was to try and correct those mistakes, exactly how you're describing for Randy. So he was now coming through writing his life story in the spirit world for all to read, to basically set the record straight. So James Randi could come with that, but unfortunately the skeptics will not believe it. But we might.
You've also got the concept of kind of like different roles that souls choose for different experiences. Who knows if James Randi's next life might be as a medium?
Yeah. Yeah,
or maybe his previous life was a medium and he wanted to experience what it's like on the other side, on the skeptic side. I actually think that's possibly what's going on in the reincarnational process. I think
in the bigger picture.
I think slaves become slave owners and vice versa. I think the oppressed become oppressors. People learn off each other. Mediums become skeptics. Skeptics become mediums. Because, as Ben was saying earlier on, it's good to kind of work out both sides of the argument, so to speak, and that could work in so many.
I did read years ago in one of the Seth books, he said that when JFK was assassinated, he had already reincarnated as a poor boy in India. So again, he went from being Mr. Powerful to insignificant kid in India.
I mean, the film Cloud. I'm into movie reviews tonight. The film Cloud Atlas is.
I love that film.
Yeah, it's about a group of souls who will, over a period of 500 years, from the past into the present and into the future, continuously reincarnate into each other's lives, playing different roles. Sometimes they're good guys, sometimes they're bad guys. It's fascinating, but they all maintain a little bit of memory of their past life. They'll recognize people they haven't met. And you hear all these stories about people who they look at someone and they think, "I know you from somewhere." No, we've never met, but they're from past lives. You know.
Well, I have to say thank you very much indeed, Ben and Leo, for taking part in our show tonight, talking about James Randi and all the other things associated with the things he investigated. Ben, if people want to know more about you, your reviews and your web pages and your channel, please give us the information.
It's HPANWO, HPANWO. That stands for Hospital Porters Against the New World Order. If you search for that, you will find everything connected to me. I've got numerous web pages, a YouTube channel, my own radio show, and things like that. So, and also my books, Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure, and several other, and the sequels as well. This book here is it's worth seeing. If you're into this sort of thing, it's worth reading that, and it's 2 sequels. It's just a story, it's a novel, but it talks about the kind of things we talk about, and it asks the question, well, what if we found out about it instead of these things being kept secret?
Okay, great, thank you. And Leo, do you have a website you want to promote, or any books?
Books, there's my book Summerland, which was written by Automatic Writing, which you can find on Amazon. I've got a new book coming out on Leslie Flint. It's called The Voice of Spirit. Leslie Flint, the transcripts with the recordings, that will be coming out, I think, in June of next year. My website is just my name, www.leo-bonomo. But if you Google Leo Bonomo, you'll find me.
Excellent. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much indeed for everyone taking part. I was going to say, Andy, promote your things quick.
3 things, actually. First of all, I'd like people to go onto YouTube for all 3 of these things. Look up the Paranormal Peepshow. So Neil is gradually, one by one, uploading all of our videos, which makes it a really quick and easy way to kind of get the videos. Paranormal Peepshow. Also on YouTube, look up Tuned In Events. Tuned with a D. Tuned In Events. That's my little thing. I've got me doing various ghost hunts and clairvoyant nights and interviews and that kind of thing. And one of the interviews that I was on is on Spooky Isles. So again, I'd like people to go onto YouTube and look up Spooky Isles. It's got a green banner. I've got an interview up on there. And a few really fascinating videos actually on poltergeists, Dracula, horror, all sorts of things. So yeah, those are
excellent. And also, of course, we're the Paranormal Peepshow on the Paranormal UK radio network as well, and we are also putting this out on my own channel, Neil Pill, on YouTube, and also on Unite Planet. So thanks very much indeed, one and all, for taking part. Very fascinating chat about the late. Who are we talking about? He's gone already. I've forgotten his name. The late James Randi. Yeah. Oh, blimey. It's only been gone a few weeks. I've forgotten who it was. Anyway, but thank you very much indeed, and join us next time.
Good night.